What's your take on Kenya's treatment of her citizens in diaspora? The question is not only with respect to the latest COVID-19 pandemic. It is also not just about the suffering of Kenyans in one country. The Kenyan government's attitude to Kenyans' diaspora in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic is not also an isolated case. Some other examples relate to domestic workers, seafarers, medics in war-afflicted jurisdictions, and the list is endless. There's a very consistent pattern on how government, mainly through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been dealing with Kenyans suffering in diaspora. Mainly, we have seen a pattern of silence, where words have been uttered, the government has disowned its people, branding the expectations and those of their families as unreasonable.
Because telling us just to send planes haiwezekani. Ndege inabeba watu 200 na ikienda Hungary sio ati huko itakuta 12. Then from there it cannot begin jumping around picking up sio Matatu. You see, this is a serious problem.
Do you have measures even to cater for those who are able to afford on their own?
Even if you were to evacuate 30,000, 10%. Imagine that they are all not in the same country, so your planes would be flying in different directions. Pick up 100 here, 1,000 there, 5,000 there. It is an impossible proposition, Mr. Chairman.
Dozens of South Africans started or repatriated from China over coronavirus outbreak have been taken to a quarantine facility. The 146 South Africans who are working and studying in Wuhan City will be in a remote resort in Limpopo province for 21 days.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has directed all its missions abroad to compile a list of Nigerians who are willing to come back home. The chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Ndege, says the directive by the ministry is sequel to requests by some Nigerians stranded abroad in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mrs. Dabre Erewa adds that the ministry has instructed that the financial implications will be borne by the prospective evacuees who will be compulsorily quarantined when they return. She also said interested citizens should inform the embassy in their countries of residence about their intention to return to Nigeria.
At Utafiti Hub, we are dedicating this session to those who have lost their loved ones in diaspora, those currently suffering in diaspora, and those that have in the past suffered and continue to nurse wounds, physical or otherwise, of pain suffered while in diaspora. Those whose cry for help went or have gone unanswered, or have been rubbished by the government of the Republic of Kenya. We therefore hope to discuss the following questions during this particular session. What is the meaning of the Kenyan passport? What, if anything, should those in diaspora and their families in Kenya legitimately expect from government in their hour of need? Are the citizens expecting too much by asking government to evacuate Kenyans? Suffering Kenyans? What duties do Kenyans in diaspora have in this relationship with their embassies and governments back home? Welcome to Utafiti Hub. To respond to these questions, and in order to get as many perspectives as we can, we are joined today by three distinguished Kenyans. We have Bwana Kamau Mbugua. Please wave, Bwana Kamau. Kamau Mbugua is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya by profession. He is also an expert in international relations. Thank you so much for making time, Bwana Kamau. We also have Roland.
Thank you very much.
We also have Roland Ebole. Roland, people need to see who you are. Roland, if you could please wave. All right, so Roland is the bespectacled gentleman in a blazer. I think there's a problem with the audio, but he will get back. We also have Dr. Kevin Gidui Muriithi. Thanks, Roland. Now, Daktari is a medical doctor by profession, and today represents the Wanjiku, the Anyango, the Otieno, the Onyango, and every other Kenyan household in this particular conversation. Thank you all for making time. Thank you, that's Daktari, the gentleman who has just waved. Thank you all for making time. So, Bwana Kamau, maybe we can start with you, just to get your views on this particular discussion.
Thank you, Njoki. At the outset, first, I would like to, let us first try to understand what diaspora means. And we also need to understand that we do have a Kenya policy on diaspora. Kenyan diaspora policy, I think it was put in place in the year 2014. And when we are talking about diaspora, we should not just be, generalize the issues. We should understand that we have a diaspora, or rather we have diaspora at various levels. Kenya is a member of the African Union. Also, is beholden to the policy of the African Union on diaspora. So at the top, we have African diaspora. The Constitutive Act of the African Union recognizes that all Black people, all people of African origin, are African diaspora. And they have their mechanisms at the African Union level of getting those Africans to interact and to consider Africa as their home going forward, so that we can build the African the African peoples together. But coming to the issue at hand, we are talking about, even when we come to the Kenyan diaspora, we have several levels. We have Kenyans who have lived in foreign countries for long and who became citizens of those countries. And in the constitution now, 2010, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, those Kenyans became eligible to become dual citizens. So we do have citizens, Kenyan citizens who are dual citizens. They are Kenyan citizens and they are citizens of other countries. We also do have Kenyans who are residing in foreign countries and they carry the Kenyan passport, but they are not citizens of those countries. At another level, we do have Kenyans who go on short visits for business, let's say annual visits to different countries for business or whatever other interactions. So as we are discussing this issue of Kenyan diaspora, we need to understand at the higher level where you have the dual citizens. Those are people who are integrated in the countries where they are citizens and are basically citizens of those countries, and therefore they follow the laws of those countries, and they do not, probably in most cases there is no urgent need for them to be evacuated by Kenya because they don't see themselves as belonging to a category of Kenyans who require the government to intervene on their behalf on a day-to-day basis. But you do have other Kenyans who are not permanently residing or living, who have not made the decision to permanently live in those countries. They probably are working there, or they're there on business, they're on 1 year period stay, 2 year period stay. So as we begin this discussion, I just wanted to set out that background, and probably I can hand it over back to you, Njoki, to guide the discussion the way you would want to guide it.
Thank you so much, Bwana Kamau, for unpacking that particular definition of who really we should be looking at when you're talking about diaspora. But even as we look at the three, and I don't know, Roland, do you agree with that particular definition, or would you like to add another fourth class of diaspora?
No, thank you, Njoki. Now, when I come in, I think I wouldn't even want to come into a dispute on definitions and all that. I will come and want to look at the human rights aspect. And no matter the tags, no matter who is where, who is fits into any category, the obligations of state in such a situation and also the expectations of citizens in such a situation. And all of us have been aware, and we've watched what has been going on with regards to, our citizens, especially in China, who, with whatever circumstances they are in, are facing all manner of discrimination, including being thrown out of their shelters or homes, and and being discriminated in manners that we could not even imagine, not being allowed to even board buses, enter restaurants, and all that. So what is the obligation of the state in such a situation? And my thinking has been that, of course, there is nowhere where you find that there is an obligation per se for a state to evacuate its citizens. But again, there is an obligation whereby when citizens outside Kenya are suffering or are being subjected into violations by anyone else, any state, any corporation, any person, then Kenya has a duty to really intervene and in all manner want to try to stop that kind of violation. So I think that is my only intervention after all the definitions have been given. So I will always want to join in any discussion from the human rights perspective.
So Roland, your take is passport, Kenyan passport or no Kenyan passport, it doesn't matter.
Yes, the reality is that it is not a passport that gives you citizenship to a country. You can lose a passport, anything can happen to your passport, and you can always go back into processes for getting back, whatever travel documents those are. So perhaps the bigger discussion is what is the role of embassies in all these countries where our fellow brothers and sisters are facing various forms of abuses and violations. So my perspective is, first of all, let's not even look at the definitions. Let's just go into looking at, are there Kenyans in state ABC? And what is the obligation of the state with regards to their safety? If the state cannot evacuate, because to a certain extent, and I'll be unpopular on this, I will agree with the PS when he says that, aeroplanes are not Matatus, they're not PSVs. There are processes to get planes to go evacuate citizens. The only place where I differ with him is that, yes, they're not Matatus, but have you tried? Like, what efforts have we seen in terms of you trying to evacuate those that can be evacuated? Every other state that respects or loves its citizens have been evacuating. As 3 days ago, UK was evacuating citizens from Nigeria. A few days ago, you saw the drama where the US wanted to evacuate its citizens from Nigeria, and you had a whole congregation of Nigerian Americans really lining up into a situation that created a crisis. So I will just revert back into obligations of state. Where does it come in? Where does it end? And the reason that a Kenyan anywhere must feel protected by its own country, no matter how far it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Roland. And while you say for you it's not really about the nationality of someone, I think there are two issues that still seem to come up from your conversation, and which speaks to the need to have that particular distinction that also Kamau has tried to draw, because as it's not just about the embassies, but also about the home countries of various people. So yes, we're looking at what are the embassies doing, but also what is the government back home doing. So, so I would want for us to keep having that at the back of our minds, because by the end of the day, the embassies would not naturally be able to operate alone. So it's really twofold, and that's why I think that particular distinction comes to mind. I don't know what, Daktari, you have to say about that. Do you think that both the embassies and the home countries have a role to play?
I'll limit my conversation or my discussion to the views of an ordinary Kenyan, and I'll try to really deviate from any legal points or too much diplomacy. But what I say is that as a citizen, I need to feel protected within and without the borders of this country. And that protection is accorded to me based on the sovereign rights that I enjoy as a citizen of Kenya. And this is very well outlined. And in the first chapter of our constitution, it's about sovereignty, which is bestowed on the people of Kenya and through our constitution. So anytime that I'm within the boundaries of Kenya or outside the boundaries of Kenya, I need to enjoy certain rights and privileges that are accorded to me basically by being a citizen of a sovereign nation. So the points that I probably want to indulge in first is the issue at hand, which has motivated this discussion, which is the relationship and the treatment of the diaspora in China, which has emanated from the COVID crisis. And I also think I will want to touch on the relationship between other countries like the doctors and the issue with Cuba and how doctors are treated in Cuba versus how they are treated here and how we feel disenfranchised and so on, and how that impacts on our feeling as citizens of this country. And maybe if there will be time also, you could touch on the relationship and how our citizens feel when they are even in our neighboring countries. Are we treated equally, even in a setting as an East African community? When we go to our neighboring countries, do we enjoy equal rights as they enjoy here? So probably once we start the discussion, I will give my points on the views regarding the whole the issue with China.
And that's now, those are very important points that have actually come up so far, which takes me back to you, Bwana Kamau. You know, in light of the conversations that have been had so far, and we see then, the question comes up as to then, what, if at all, is the extent of the Kenyan government's duty to its citizens, and in this particular discussion, suffering citizens in diaspora? Does it have any duty? As Dr. is saying, you know, when a Kenyan is in a different country, you want to feel that at the bare minimum, that whatever happens, if whatever threats were to come to you, that then your government should be able to come in and speak or assist you in one way or the other. Is that a legitimate expectation for Kenyans to have and their families back home? Or is it just wishful, ungrounded, and unfounded expectation?
It is absolutely correct to say that Kenyans, whether in Kenya or abroad, do have a legitimate expectation of their government coming to their assistance when the need arises. And my two brothers, Roland and Daktari, are correct to say what it is that they're saying. If we take the case of the recent mistreatment of Kenyans in China, and as an example for purposes of this discussion, what we are able to see is that indeed there is, you cannot dispute the fact that there has been mistreatment of Kenyans. So it's a question of what has the government done to mitigate or to help Kenyans deal with that that crisis that has arisen there. We must remember that this is a crisis. It is a time of crisis. And part of what I have seen, the videos that I have seen about the mistreatment of Kenyans, is by local officials at lower levels of the Chinese government. And when I have heard the Chinese government at the higher levels, what they are saying is that that is not the policy of China. But that doesn't mean that mistreatment of Kenyans has not happened. It has happened. And that is where the government is then expected to come in. We know that embassies do offer consular services. When in normal times, when you don't have a crisis like this one of COVID-19, the consulate services entail things like registration of birth of Kenyans who are being born in those countries, you know, negotiating with the local officials when Kenyans are arrested by the police or there is a case here and there. That is what consulates do. That is the responsibility of the government. That is why we have embassies in different countries. But we do also know that there are issues of capacity. And many African countries do not have the capacity to have embassies in every country out there. And in a lot of cases, we do have embassies that are representing several countries, so that you have, let's say, an embassy in one country, and then it represents, like, I know for a long time, the Kenyan embassy in Saudi Arabia also took care of UAE, Qatar, and a few Oman, and a few other Arabic countries there. So we have issues of capacity. What can our government do? We do know that our government, the Kenyan government, even in Kenya, because we are a developing country, does have issues of capacity to address most of our problems. Equally, this happens also in foreign countries. The question that we should be addressing is whether the Kenyan government has been seen to be, concerned about the crisis that has hit the world all over. But coming to evacuation, because the issue of evacuation is arising every now and then, we need to ask ourselves whether we have the capacity to evacuate our peoples. I do recall that there were discussions that were had between the Kenyan government and the Chinese government, where it was agreed that it would be safer not to evacuate Kenyans. And so far, from the record that I'm seeing, is that no Kenyan died in China because of not being evacuated. And remember that the citizens of Kenya also do have the responsibility to obey the laws of the country in which they are in. So it is a question of not unreasonably, demanding that take me home. There has to be logistical issues to see whether that is possible. And where it is not possible, it is best where citizens obey the laws of the country in which they are in to the best way that they can. Because if they didn't do so, then they will fall into a conflict with the officials of that government. So I do not have the details, and I do not want to attribute any wrongdoing on the part of Kenyans in those countries where there has been mistreatment. But we also do know that political systems are different. And sometimes the expectation of the administration in the country where Kenyans will find themselves may differ from your own. And it is your responsibility to understand how things are done in the country in which you're residing, and living to the best of your ability within the laws of that country.
Bwana Kamau, and you have put it very well, that we're not just looking at China and COVID-19. We're looking also at other historical issues. And that's why even at the beginning, I was able to identify that it's what Utafiti Hub has observed is that there is a pattern as to how the government has been responding to these kinds of issues. You raised the issue of the fact that there has not been a death. But you see, we're looking at, as Daktari mentioned, we're looking also at how are the Kenyan doctors being treated, for instance, when they go to Cuba, and vis-a-vis how we treat them when they come to Kenya. So even as we're talking about capacity issues, the bigger question then becomes, what do we have? Should we expect anything from government? And if so, even now, as we look at the issue of COVID-19, has the government done anything really? And this I ask because we have all been watching news. We had very recently the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, PS saying that what Roland mentioned, but it's all over the media. The issue that that an aeroplane is not a matatu. People are suffering, people are struggling, and everyone knows that an aeroplane is not a matatu. But how does that then go to help the common Kenyan who is here and crying for their beloved person who is in diaspora? And how does that also help the person in diaspora to even give them hope? And how does that also influence the manner in which the host countries then end up treating the Kenyans in diaspora? Because if your own parents are condemning you and doing so in public, how then does that affect how everyone else is going to treat you? Do they feel then that they have any duty to help you in any way? So as we're talking about the capacity issue, do you think, in your view, the Kenyan government has been able to demonstrate any level of commitment in terms, and has it been able to show that it has done its best? Because, for instance, there's one of the clips that has been going around and which shows the ambassador saying that it is not about whether or not we have evacuated anyone. And you know, it's that neither the government does not even plan to do so. And yet, even at the very beginning of our conversation, we agreed, or we were able to highlight, that we have Kenyans who just went on safari. They had no intentions of residing there. They are not citizens of any other country, you know, but for being citizens of Kenya. So do you think, in your view, the government has demonstrated any level of effort or commitment towards assisting those particular Kenyans there?
I don't want to judge the level of the commitment of the Kenyan government because I have not followed that, you know, so closely as to be able to judge that. However, what I would want to say is this, is that when a Kenyan goes to a foreign country, it is their responsibility to give information as to where they are to the Kenyan embassy. Because you see, once you have landed in China, and there is a crisis like we have in our hands right now, and what the Kenyan government will do through the embassy is try to make an announcement. It can publish that in newspapers. It can use whatever medium of communication to ensure that it is calling out to Kenyans to come forward and give information as to where they are. Because you see, it is not possible for the embassy to be tracking Kenyans where they are. So we have different levels of responsibility. The Kenyan who is in a foreign country must declare where they are, what sort of assistance they want. Once that has happened, we can then judge the level of reaction by the government, what the government has done. And when we are looking at an issue like evacuation, that is just one of the way of intervention that the government can engage. We do have many others, and the most effective would be where the Kenyan government is working together with the government of the country where these Kenyans are, so that the Kenyan side will understand what the government in China, for example, wants Kenyans and other foreigners in that country to do what it wants to do. So to a large extent, what you do is dependent on the laws and the systems of the country in which you are. So Kenya cannot decide and wake up one day and decide to hire the entire Kenya Airways and the entire, we have about 4 million Kenyans who are in diaspora. I think about 4 million. The last time I checked, the entire African diaspora is 30 million Africans out there. And I think the last time I checked, we were about 4 million Kenyans who are in these countries. It is not possible, you know, for Kenya to just wake up one morning and hire all the airlines to go and evacuate Kenya. So let us not sensationalize the issue by this idea that evacuation is the only solution to it. The solution is, first, Kenyans to be responsible citizens, to share their information with the Kenyan embassies wherever they are, make sure that they are obeying the laws of the country in which they are in, because there is no magic wand. And we have seen that even developed countries are having challenges on the same issues. So to expect too much again would be to be expecting what cannot happen, because we do know that issues of capacity are real.
Roland, you know, and indeed I do agree with Bonakabao on the issue that whenever Kenyan goes to a different jurisdiction, it is important that then you notify the embassy, and of course that is the most prudent thing to do, especially if you're going then to be able to follow up with in the event of such emergencies. But Roland, I'm very keen to hear your views on the aspect of you know, every day since, for instance, if we were to take the COVID example, the current COVID pandemic example, we've been seeing the PS, the Cabinet Secretary, Bwana Mutahi Kagwe, every day giving us the figures of the infected people, of the people who have been tested, of, you know, every day he gives us figures, and not just every day, but, you know, several times in any given day. So do you think, or what you take on whether or not the ministry, while acknowledging what Bonakabao has said, that evacuation is not the only way forward, do you think then that the ministry perhaps has a duty, the same way that the health CS is explaining the number of people who have been tested and all that, is there a duty for the CS or the PS, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or anyone else in government to come forth and tell Kenyans that these are the number of people in diaspora, these are the number of people who have reported as being in countries X and X and X, and as expressly and specifically as the CS Health is giving us the figures of the people dying and surviving, should they also give us, some bit of specific as to what is being done, as opposed to blanket positions of we are liaising with the governments we are liaising with all those governments. Is there any need?
Yeah. So Njoki, I hear you, and I'll respond to Advocate Kamau in a very short response before you go there, whereby evacuation, yes, is not a human right. It is not. It is not your right to be evacuated, and of course, depending on a crisis, it really depends on the situation of the crisis. But again, you must realize that in case whereby your citizens are suffering, and maybe evacuation becomes one of the only ways to really, get.
Sorry, Roland, we seem to be losing you. Roland? And maybe as Roland comes back, Daktari, what's your take on the issues I have raised and what Bwana Kamau has spoken about?
The question that comes to mind when you raise this issue is, why do Kenyans want to be evacuated? And why did this not happen before? So we cannot take this as a wholesome issue and say that evacuation is not a human right and that citizens need to be responsible. We need to ask ourselves, what exactly has happened in this time and space that has made the issue of evacuating our citizens from a foreign land become a topic of discussion? And it becomes very simple. When the COVID crisis started in Wuhan, and it was the epicenter, and we got all those scary statistics from the Chinese and how many people were dying in a day. That is the first time we spoke about evacuation. And the government came out very diplomatically and said that we feel that our citizens are safer there. And also it was to keep Kenyans who are in this country safe, to avoid bringing in probably citizens who had already been infected. And there was no issue at that time. At the same time, you have to remember that even during that time, other countries went ahead and evacuated their citizens. The South Africans took out all their students who are in Wuhan, put them in a very decent facility. And when they were getting released after 2 weeks of quarantine, the president himself, the president of South Africa, was there to receive them. So it's an issue of perception. And when it comes to perception, then the issue of communication becomes very key. It's not just about what is being done in the back end, but is what the citizens are made to feel. Because the issue of our relations with China has not started with the COVID crisis. I think we have always felt, and this is a general perception of many citizens, that the Chinese policy towards Kenya has been imperialistic, whereas we've tried to always be overly diplomatic, even when the diplomacy was not due to be extended to them. And I always feel that any nation, the foreign policy that you take should be one that evokes pride and patriotism, of course, and devoid of any xenophobia or jingoism from the citizens, but making the citizens feel proud of their country. So what evoked all these emotions is what we saw. And we saw Black citizens being hauled to the streets on the basis of their nationality and color. We know there are many other citizens of other countries, European countries, the Americas, who are in China and who are not receiving the same treatment. And if you remember, I think we shared a clip of one of the citizens who is holed up in Guangzhou in China, and he said this all started when a Nigerian who flew to China tested positive for COVID. And then they took it that now all Black citizens were probably carriers of the COVID virus and needed to be quarantined. And this was not done systematically. It was done in a very racist and abusive manner. So the response from the government should not have been devoid of this whole scenario. It should have taken into consideration what are the circumstances that are making the citizens feel disenfranchised and feel oppressed. So I take exception with the response that was given by Ambassador Kamau, and which came out very badly. I mean, he's an excellent diplomat, but and as I say, I think there's a very thin line between diplomacy and politics. But for him, he showed a very big rift between the political presentation, which was expected of him, both in the press conference and in the presentation that he gave to our elected representatives in parliament. Some of the issues he raised was the whole statement, the catchphrase, that Ndege sio Matatu. You know, as a diplomat, you need to use diplomatic language within and without the borders of this country. And for the citizens who are the audience of the country, they felt that it came out as a very, high-handedly, and someone who felt that he was superior and more understanding than the citizens, because we all understand the logistical complications of evacuation. But this will have been communicated in a very good way and say that as much as we are not able to evacuate, these are the things that we are doing. But then we ask ourselves, how come other countries have been able to evacuate large portions of their citizenry? We have had the Britons evacuated from Kenya in their hundreds. What are the logistical measures that they took to be able to bring these citizens together and take them out of the country? We have a national carrier, and I mean, beyond anything else, it would just serve the purpose of serving the citizens at this time. And that would probably be the only good thing we would feel out of it. And then there was the issue he raised about the citizens in Dubai, and he said that there were many citizens who they made arrangement with the Emirates, and only 13 showed up to pay. So we should have asked ourselves, why were the other citizens who were asking to be evacuated unable to pay? And how would the government have come in this time of crisis? It's established a lifeline fund for the underprivileged citizens, and probably those citizens who are unable to pay was purely a financial issue. It was not purely an issue of not being willing to be evacuated and not being willing to pay. So did they go out of their way to understand these specific citizens who had asked to be evacuated, and we arranged for them the mechanisms to be evacuated with a financial catch, of course, because the fares were hiked and so on? How would we have gone out of our way to help them, and what mechanisms would we have created? So, and also you ask ourselves about those who are stranded in India, who are sick and unwell. And, it just goes and becomes a very broad issue, and becomes an issue of public relations and communication, and allowing citizens to feel that their government cares for them and their government loves them, and it's doing, within its limited capacity, it's doing as much as it can. There are also some issues that were raised about the citizens in China not being registered. Of course, most of the citizens you find from African countries in more developed nations are economic immigrants. And since they are not able to obtain proper documents that entitle them to work in those countries, they go there to scavenge on probably the financial droplets that they can get from doing informal businesses here and there. And for him to say that these citizens are not registered and that none of them had the proper papers, I find that, and this I say from purely as a citizen point of view, without wanting to go into the whatever documents that you need, but anytime I travel abroad, the document that I feel puts me, at peace is my passport. Because anytime that you are there and you read the first page of your passport, and this is what is, I'll quote what it says, I have it here with me. It says, these are to request and require, in the name of the President of the Republic of Kenya, all those whom it may concern, to allow the bearer to pass freely, without let and hindrance, and to afford the bearer such assistance and protection as may be necessary. So if any citizen is out there, with or without a visa, and as you would understand, a visa is a tool to control the movement of people. And that is why there have always been so many issues why some citizens are allowed into some countries without visas and others are not. So of course, it's also a tool that has not been received very well by citizens of third world countries, because it's a tool to limit them from going to the developed nations. So for all those citizens, they had their rights protected by bearing a passport. Of course, there are repercussions for not having the right follow-up documents and visas and so on, but they should not be told, now go on and suffer because you do not have the right documents. So the communication from the government came out very badly, And some people in the interwebs, as you would say, said that the ambassador in his communication sounded better than the spin doctor of the Foreign Bureau in China, because he went on and on to defend the Chinese governments and their actions, saying that the Chinese ambassador had apologized, but probably had not done it on social media, which he said that they are not very good on doing it on social media. Yet we know that the Chinese have previously apologized for issues relating to Kenyans on social media. So I think it feels very bad when the diplomat in chief who should be representing you apologizes for an infringement of the rights in another country, as opposed to taking an approach. We saw how the Nigerians reacted to this whole issue. The Speaker of the National Assembly summoned the Chinese ambassador, and as much as it probably didn't bear any different fruits from what have been borne by our interaction with the Chinese, it made them feel good and protected. So it's also an issue of perception, other than the back-end bureaucracies and deals that they would have in their communications with the Chinese government. So on a communication standpoint, I would give him a solid 0 on that.
All right, and you raised two very fundamental issues, which I would like for Roland to speak to as he's responding to Bwana Kamau's comments. The aspect of, one, even where we have Kenyans who have registered, who have gone to the embassies and registered their presence there, we have, you know, and which brings me back to that question of the same way that the CS Health has been telling us about the number of tests that have been done. So what reports do we have about these people who had well registered, and you know, what, to the extent that the government then has been able to help them? And Dr. also raises the other aspect that we have also been able to see from our own research, the aspect where you find that Kenyans are told, fine, even the ones that have registered in some jurisdictions are told, if you want help, then you need to pay X. So what happens to those ones who then are not able to pay X? We know that the diaspora do make a financial contribution to this country. So are we then right in saying, or what happens to those people who have not been able to pay? Is it legitimate for the people of Kenya to expect a response, or to expect the government to update us on what steps have been taken to help those people, the same way that the government is taking steps to distribute food in Kenya?
Yeah. Exactly the point that I was raising earlier. The matter of evacuation is that we are talking about a situation whereby, you know, we have Kenyans, whether registered or not registered, whether illegally there or not legally there, they are Kenyans who now face additional barriers in being able to adequately protect themselves and even cater for themselves. I was giving an example of Uganda, whereby the government is already distributing food, and it's already saying that non-nationals will not get that food as a distribution. And of course, this is actually to the needy, so those vulnerable cases. So in the same way, during this time, Kenyans, wherever they are, they have issues to do with their, you know, accessing health services, accessing food if it's being distributed, you know, issues around housing, issues around, and we need a voice. We need a voice in the countries where Kenyans are. And in as much as evacuation may not be practicable in all situations, do we have, you know, Kenya really wanting to take interest of their people in those countries? But right now we should have seen already, even if it's registered people at the embassy, already some kind of data or some kind of information about, you know, in China we have 1 million Kenyans. We have 500,000 Kenyans. Out of these 500,000 Kenyans, we have 20 in, you know, some facilities, or either being isolated, being quarantined, being wherever it is being done to them. You know, we need to have that kind of details. When we talk about, you know, having faith in our government, having faith in our government exactly means that, whereby we have information, we know that our loved ones, because these are people, these are relatives to us, these are people that, you know, some of us are close to, knowing that, you know, whether in Cameroon, just a random example, whoever is there, at least the government has them in mind, and the government is doing something already to see that even if they can't come back home at this time, to just ensure that out of these 10,000 people, only 500 are really in need of some kind of as an assistance. So this is the communication that we need more and more from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or such departments, not Ambassador Kamau coming to defend the ambassador that no one should be bashing. Yes, we should not be bashing anybody. We should not be bashing our ministers, but we're asking very pertinent questions. How are we taking care of Kenyans outside Kenya? It does not matter if anything happens to an American, whether they did not obey the laws of Kenya. If anything happened to an American in Kenya today, the embassy would want to know what is going on and would want to actually take steps to intervene or be part of any solutions there. So let us still hold our government accountable. Human rights of these people and their citizenship is really of great importance here, need to actually be taken into account. Thank you.
But Kamau, that particular issue of, yes, we do have citizens who have registered, who have presented themselves for registration. So, and so do you think, is there a need? Because you will agree with me that we have not seen the ambassador or the president or anyone else in government coming out to give us the figures with respect to Kenyans in diaspora and how we are taking care of them, apart from, the comments on the Matatu not being, the aeroplane not being. So we are not seeing hands-on detail, apart from also just general comments that there's liaison between governments. Is it necessary, in your view, to have, at the bare minimum, data with respect to those ones who are properly registered, data with respect to
In fact, one of the primary objectives of the Kenyan diaspora policy that I talked about is to collect data and ensure that we have data that is up to date of Kenyans who are in foreign countries. There is no gainsaying the fact that the responsibility to do that is on the government. We can judge, of course, the government on the basis of to what extent they have done that. But we do, the issue of data collection is an ongoing process because you have people who are going in and coming out. So in a situation like we have today, and where we are faulting the ambassador for communicating in a way that was not sensitive. We have ambassadors across the world who make mistakes, and sometimes they say things that are not diplomatic. That is correct. So that is to be judged on the level of the person. Equally, on the issue of evacuation, because this issue can get us to confuse. What are we talking about evacuating Kenyans because there is discrimination of Kenyans in those countries, or are we talking about evacuating Kenyans because of COVID-19? If you look at the evacuation of Kenyans in terms of COVID-19, there is no basis of demanding to evacuate Kenyans. The primary responsibility of all citizens, of all people who are in a particular country, is of the country where people find themselves in. And Daktari, you are right when you read that statement in the passport. When you carry that passport, your president is asking on behalf of Kenya that you be given all the assistance. So the assistance is to be given to that country in which you find yourselves in. Then it is your responsibility to be then obedient to the laws and the systems of that country. That is the position as it is. When we are talking about information, because these are issues of capacity, we have the consulate responsibilities of the Kenyan embassies abroad is to ensure that it is communicating effectively to Kenyans out there. At the same time, Kenyans are expected to offer that information. Where you have cases of mistreatment and discrimination, it is the responsibility of the Kenyan embassy to take up that case with the relevant organs or the relevant departments of government in that country to ensure that justice is done. Because remember, if you take the Chinese case, China is still a friendly country to Kenya. And that is why we have not broken any diplomatic relations. It can be that you have officials at lower levels who behave in such a way as to create the impression that the Chinese as a whole are against us. The policy at the government level of China may be that all people should be treated equally. But you do have renegade and rogue officials who do things contrary to government. That happens everywhere. So we should not get overly sensitive on this issue. We should insist that our embassy takes up cases, specific cases of abuse, specific cases of discrimination, and ensures that justice is done. Because justice is, as we know it, even here in Kenya, you have injustices being committed against other people. So those countries do not demand that we break the relationship, the diplomatic relationship we have with them. What you do is ensure that our embassies are doing that which is necessary and which is required by the law to ensure that where there are injustices, they are taken up and followed to the letter to ensure that justice is done. That's what I would want to say at this point in time.
And you see, Boda Kamau, even as you speak to, and thank you very much for those that particular rich contribution. But even as we're looking at the people, as we're talking about evacuation, and that's why we said from the beginning, we're not just looking at a COVID-19 scenario. We are also looking at, and that's why we agreed also that it's not just an issue of evacuation, but there are other ways of looking at it. But as a Kenyan, even before you being a professional or anything else, as a Kenyan, you have interacted, and all of us, including all the panelists, have had at one point or the other various cabinet secretaries and before that ministers speaking to the fact that even when we have our Kenyans who have gone abroad to become domestic workers, and we've had the ambassadors saying that because the person came in illegally, therefore they are on their own. What is your take on the illegal aspect, on the non-properly documented Kenyans in diaspora? Do they have a right to expect any kind of protection from government?
Absolutely, absolutely. If a Kenyan finds or gets into a foreign country illegally, and they find themselves there, so they find themselves on the wrong side of the law of the country in which they find themselves in, that means that the consulate services of the Kenyan embassies abroad require that they make sure that such persons, if they are taken before a court of law or before whatever justice system mechanism exists in the country in which they are in, that the embassy staff ensure that justice is done in the circumstances. There is no law that says that if you commit a crime in a foreign country, you should be treated as if you did not commit it. The level of intervention by the embassy is to ensure that you're accorded a fair hearing in terms of finding yourself in that situation. If you find yourself, if you look at the domestic workers cases in countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, you have Kenyans who arrange here fraudulently to take other Kenyans, their brothers and sisters, to go to those countries. So you never stop this. You never stop. It's the same as drug cartels. You don't have a situation. America itself is grappling with criminal activities at a very high level. I have seen personally videos of drug lords who operate submarines to transport drugs from one jurisdiction to another. So it's not a question of Kenyans always saying serikali saidia, serikali ingilia kati. We have a responsibility of also to be responsible citizens here at home and abroad. But where we have issues arising about Kenyans abroad, because that is the topic of the day, whether the Kenyan is on the wrong side or on the right side of the law, and there is a crisis like the COVID-19 crisis, we want, of course, to see and feel that the diplomatic missions, our diplomatic missions abroad, are sensitive to the rights and the well-being of our Kenyans, of our Kenyan brothers in those countries.
Thank you very much. Roland, any comment with respect to that?
Yeah, I look that we are agreeing in terms of irrespective of whether people are in a country legally or not, whether they are still citizens, and they should be as an accorded the kind of protection that they should. You remember just during the start, I think early March, when there were, when there were allegations that a plane came from China carrying I don't know how many hundreds of Chinese people, and there's a bit of discrimination from Kenyans towards the Chinese. And the ambassador actually issued a statement, a very strong statement. And in fact, that statement was actually very awkward because it threatened arrests upon, was it arrest or action? I don't remember it very well, upon anybody that discriminates against, Chinese people. And I'm thinking, when that happened, you could realize that there was a very strong element of, authority and, a Kenyan government having allowed, the embassy to actually really come out and want to protect its people. And this is what we should be saying. So it is an emotive issue. Of course, it's not always that we must really, act with regards to all manner of decorum and all that. Like, I really respect how the Nigerian, diplomat did. Like, he went out for the people. And sometimes we need to do that. We need to actually show that we are serious about our people. I know words alone do not help protect our people, but again, it returns some level of confidence. And so on this, what I'd really want to say is that beyond evacuation, there are many other rights that Kenyans abroad may actually now be missing, or the rights may be violated. And it's upon our embassies to start looking at all this. The documents they have about Kenyan people who are legally registered, start looking at where they are at, start looking at their needs, and even if they can't fulfill, just reassuring them that the Kenyan government thinks about them. And those that are illegally there, and I'm sure right now they're already coming out because they have to now come out for protection, also take them as its own responsibility.
Thank you so much, Roland. Daktari?
I tend to agree with the sentiments and the very strong points that have been raised. But I go back to the premise of my discussion to say that citizens need not only to be protected, but to feel that they are protected. And at times it becomes an issue of how is the whole approach and intervention being perceived? Because if you look at this whole China-Kenya issue, it's a diaspora issue on its own, because there is a very special relationship between us and China. And for the common citizen, they feel that China is now imposing itself in Kenya as an imperialist power. I think it's not right on us as a very young country that we've just come out from the jaws of imperialism. And as we were starting to feel free, now we start feeling that a different imperial power has come in from a different angle. And this is a general perception, because when you gave me these points of discussion, I just met up with some people and asked, common people, the barber and the gateman, how do you feel about China? And their general feeling about China is that we cannot reprimand China because we owe them so much money. So that is the general feeling of a Kenyan who has, very bare understanding of diplomatic relations and all that, is that we feel that we are indebted to this country. And so they have sort of a right to, discriminate on our citizens without getting reprimanded for it. And it sends a very strong message to the government and its response. Because if citizens feel disenfranchised in their own country, the problems with relations with China have not only been in the diaspora, but even here at home. We had the whole debacle of, the video of a Chinese whipping a Kenyan, and as much as probably taken out of context and all, it sends very strong emotions. And probably these are the emotions that are reverberating in this issue. And Kenyans feel, now they can whip us here, and they are still whipping us in their own country.
But so, and sorry to interject you at this point, but yeah, and indeed those are live complaints, live issues about it. But just to bring us back to this particular issue because you see this issue of the Kenyans in diaspora, it's not just unique to China. And that's
Yes.
why, for instance, and we may not have spoken so much about the aspect of Kenyans being held as prisoners of war, while they have gone to help as medics and other players in other jurisdictions. So maybe it's really something that we need to continue to look at. And perhaps I will come back to you when, because now we are at the wrap-up session. I'll give each one of you about 2 minutes or 3 minutes to just wrap up the entire conversation, really focusing on this issue of Kenyans in diaspora. What is happening, what should be happening, and what then should we hope to see as a way forward? What do you think that perhaps government should do to make things better? Perhaps we can start with you, Bwana Kamau, and any other comments that you may have unsaid.
What I would say is this, is that diaspora, the Kenyan diaspora, is recognized as a contributor to the development of Kenya. In fact, if you look at the statistics, you will find that the remittances as of last year, I think, were number one in terms of reserves, foreign currency reserves contribution. It was, I think, 227 billion Kenya shillings, which is ahead of tourism, which is ahead of agriculture, and it is number one. And hence the policy of 2014, and it targets diaspora as a part and parcel of Kenya's development. It is in the Vision 2030, it is almost in every ministry's policy papers, you will find it there. So there is no doubt that not just Kenya, but the whole of Africa has recognized the importance of diaspora. That said, we are now seeing that activism. In fact, that policy was contributed because of the contribution of civil societies like Kenya Community Abroad, and I think there is another group of Kenyans that is abroad. They contributed in the formulation of that policy. And part of the reason you're seeing this activism is because of the level of engagement of the government and the diaspora, and the awakening of the diaspora in the sense that they expect government to do much about them, seeing that they are actually lead in terms of the foreign currency reserves that they are contributing to this country. So the diaspora is a core component of our development. And therefore, the government must focus more and more on them, and especially on the individual expectations. As one of us had said, the legitimate expectation of the Kenyan in the diaspora should be the same as the expectation of a Kenyan in Kenya. So a Kenyan should feel Kenyan wherever they are. So government must do more to ensure that there is effective communication about when there are issues like the issues we have seen arising in China. We need clarity. Is it the policy of the government of China, or is it some rogue officials of the government at district levels who are doing these things? So I think the failure has been in terms of communication. And when you look at our policy, it talks about communication as one way of ensuring that we have we have a seamless mechanism of ensuring that the diaspora is part and parcel of Kenya. So for me, I would say that we have had failures at several levels. At the level of communication by our own diplomatic members, and also by the foreign governments where Kenyans find themselves in, where we have seen cases of discrimination and mistreatment, and the issue is not coming out well. Because if there was a clear case of discrimination by policy of government, you break diplomatic relations with that country. But if it is not at the government level, then we want to see our diplomatic missions in these countries taking up individual cases or cases of groups of Kenyans and ensuring that justice is done in the circumstances. At the same point, I would want to close by saying that Kenyans must also remember that they have a responsibility to be good citizens and to be the same way that the president requests foreign governments in the statement read in the passport by Daktari, requiring those foreign governments to treat us well. It is the same way that we must give a good image of our own country by behaving well and by being citizens of the world who obey the laws of the land in which we find ourselves.
Thank you very much, Bwana Kamau. Daktari?
Thank you very much, and I think my apologies for belaboring on the Chinese issue. It would be unfair to say that the diaspora in mass has been treated unfairly. We were informed that there are 3 million Kenyans abroad. And probably the issues that we are raising just involve less than probably 5% or maybe even 1% of this whole population. But you see, most of the times when people are comfortable, that is not a news item. The news item becomes when there is an injustice and when there is something that has been done that is wrong. So that is why we pick out, issues in China. Why are they being treated wrong? And that is why it becomes a point of discussion. I had raised the issue, as much as we may not have time to discuss it, about the Cubans and how our doctors went there and they didn't get decent treatment, they didn't get paid enough. Yet when we imported Cuban doctors, of course, against the many wishes of the local doctors here, we treated them like kings and paying them salaries that are way beyond the normal government's pay scale. So you see, such issues evoke emotions when there is unfairness. We've seen how we feel when our fishermen in Bigingo are treated. We've seen when we have our citizens taken as prisoners in South Sudan, and when our citizens or businessmen in Namanga are told to cross over back to the Kenyan side. So it's these small hotspots that really evoke emotions, and those are the times that we call on the government to really define a clear foreign policy that is not just on paper and is not just something that is a technical document, but something that is rolled out and is felt by even the most marginalized citizen to be aware that their government is out there to protect them, especially when they are outside the borders of this country. So just to wrap up is that I would say that as much as there are many things that the government has done positively, it needs to really up its communication game. They need to go back to the drawing board, and this is a time of crisis. People are stressed, people are under curfew, and they're just looking for a ray of hope. So that's why we feel nice when the Minister for Health, is our Cabinet Secretary for Health is out there and giving us the statistics, giving us the measures that they are taking. So in equal measure, the ministry should come out very diplomatically and very cordially and communicate their actions and what they are doing to support the Kenyans in the diaspora, so that we can feel comfortable, we can feel loved, and we can know that things will be taken care of. So it's more or less an issue of perception and communication. They're doing probably a good job in the back end, but they need to manage their front office very well.
Thank you, Daktari. Roland, please remember to turn on your microphone.
Yes. So I totally agree with my colleagues. Of course, as in around this time, we must hold our government accountable for, for the international human rights law obligations and standards for them to keep. But even for themselves, they have to hold other governments accountable, the governments where its citizens also are. And this is for governments to best protect not just their own public health and alone, but to also support people who are most at risk and may face adverse impacts. And mostly these people are citizens that are in those countries very, very vulnerable. Most of them may have gone there for various reasons, maybe school, maybe just tourists, and maybe for medication, like in India, whereby you have people that are stuck in hotels. They had planned to be there for only a week, but then they've been forced to stay there for a month, meaning that they may not even have means to take care of themselves, of their next day bill and their food needs and all that. The government must come in and not just provide reassurance, but try and provide some form of alternative kind of means for them to survive that 1 month. And beyond that, we should also, as Kenyans, demand that our government, in terms of responding to COVID-19, and also in terms of just giving us a clearer picture of how we are doing as a country, to also give us information about citizens of Kenya who are in other countries. In that, we know the impact that COVID-19 has had on us. And this is actually our right. And not just the impact of COVID-19 on us, this people in those other countries must also be assured of treatment, health and all that, access to health. There are so many issues around rights of citizens abroad than just maybe the kind of protection from discrimination that comes from maybe other citizens, doing unto them, or issues around evacuation, but also some of these issues whereby how is the diaspora citizens of Kenya accessing some of these services such as health, food, housing, and all that? If we are communicating or holding those other states where Kenyans are, and it's a responsibility of them at the time being to honor and give them their human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for making time and for your contribution. This has been a very rich discussion, and I'm sure it's part of our duty as citizens of this country, so that even as we are calling upon government to do certain things, it also behoves of each one of us to make our individual contribution, and this is most certainly part of that. And as Utafiti Hub, we have our take on this particular matter, and it's that one, it is not just about government, it's not just about evacuating Kenyans, it's about what else are they doing. Are they taking, are they able to follow up on those Kenyans that are registered? Are they helping those unregistered Kenyans to even comply? So it goes beyond just an issue of evacuation. And what we are saying is that the government does have a duty to update us as Kenyans on records of how the Kenyans in diaspora are being treated, how they're being handled for this entire process, as we have seen with the Ministry of Health giving us statistics every day several times in the course of the day. So the government has an accountability issue, and they also have a duty. In addition to doing all those things, they have a duty to update us and to communicate, and not just communicate, but giving us the statistics, but also communicating sensitively, because this is a sensitive matter. So we call upon government to not just look at making general comments, but that they need to be very deliberate about assuring Kenyans, because it is not only our human right, it's not just a human right issue, but that the government actually has a duty to do all these things to Kenyans, even when they have capacity challenges, and then be able to communicate of the responses both by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as our embassies to the responses of the plight of Kenyans, not just with respect to COVID-19, but because we have seen a pattern. When you're talking about the issue of Cuban doctors and Kenyan doctors in Cuba, when you're talking about prisoners of war, when you're talking about Kenyans going to act as domestic workers, clearly there's a national problem and there's a governance gap that needs to be audited and rectified. It's unfortunate that a country such as Kenya that claims sovereignty and that has many other things going for Kenya can have these kind of problems. But at the same time, we acknowledge that it is indeed possible that some Kenyan ambassadors could be doing very well and going a long way in help, to help Kenyans in their various areas of station. To them, we say congratulations and thank you very much. We call upon those who have such information to share as much as they can, so that Kenyans can also get to see these positive stories. Because as we have been able to agree here, that will be enough to share or to give Kenyans a ray of hope in many ways, especially after the statements by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the gaps or what we are not doing. So thank you very much. That's our take as Utafiti Hub, and we hope that we can continue to do what is right for Kenya. Utafiti Hub, capacity through many lenses.